Buckle up, history buffs and conspiracy theorists, because the Grand Canyon is hiding something extraordinary. A secret so monumental, it could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the world. Prepare to have your mind blown as we delve into the depths of this natural wonder and uncover evidence that challenges the very foundation of our understanding of human history.
We have the Great Unconformity, a strange geological phenomenon which has left scientists baffled for decades. You see, the Grand Canyon was formed over millions of years as the Colorado River cut through the Colorado Plateau, eroding the plateau, which is made up of three main rock layer sets, which each contain various layers of sediment within them. Each small layer in the walls of the canyon can be dated, and for the most part, it's pretty consistent. Until, of course, the Proterozoic layer suddenly jumps to meet the layer formed from the Tappets sandstone. There is a unconformity between the two. And by that I mean that the Proterozoic layer, also known as the ancient Vishnu schist, dates back to over 1.7 billion years ago, and the next layer of sandstone only dates back to approximately 525 million years ago, meaning that there is a significant amount of rock layers missing from the geological record. And the missing layers represent a major part of Earth's history, so scientists cannot figure out a reason as to why they wouldn't be there. It's inexplicable and a total mystery.
One of the creepiest discoveries made in the Grand Canyon? Bones. Human bones. Something that happens pretty often, apparently. The amount of deaths that have happened here are almost impossible to count, let alone solve all of these cases. There have been tons of human remains found in the Grand Canyon that have never been identified. And some have been identified, but the circumstances of their deaths have never been solved. In 2005, the Cold Case Squad was formed in Coconino County with the sole purpose of solving as many of these cases as they could. The members of the unit are all volunteers, having expertise in careers like the FBI, the Department of Public Safety Crime Lab, forensic nursing, crime scene investigations, National Park Service law enforcement, and more. And some of these cases they're looking into go all the way back to 1955.
From bones to no bones, another great mystery of the Grand Canyon, America's greatest canyon, is a distinct lack of not only rock layers but also dinosaur bones. That's right, despite its ancient origins, dinosaur bones have yet to be found within the rocks of the Grand Canyon. While at first this seems like it could possibly be one of the world's greatest mysteries, there is actually an explanation as to why no dinosaur fossils or bones exist in the area. And that is because while the canyon itself likely does not predate the dinosaurs, the rocks in which the canyon was carved from do. In fact, in some instances, the rocks in the canyon are billions of years older than the oldest recorded dinosaurs. So while the lack of dinosaur fossils isn't necessarily unexplainable, it's still pretty interesting.
Next up, we have the story of the cursed blanket. The story goes that in the spring of 1879, a trader named Don McGuire crossed the Colorado River on his way back to Utah. He'd been finishing up a trading trip in northern Arizona. At the ferry, he met a woman named Emma Lee, who was running the ferry. She needed some of McGuire's goods, and in exchange, she offered him a beautiful Navajo blanket. But according to her, the blanket had a bit of a dark history. Emma told him after they made their trade that her late husband's luck had taken a turn for the worse as soon as he got the blanket. Not sure why she'd say this after having just made a trade. Wouldn't really sell me on it, but I guess, a trade's a trade. It was too late. McGuire wasn't superstitious anyway, though, and didn't believe in any kind of curse. But in the end, McGuire would end up writing that the blanket was a, quote, curse to all who possess it. His luck started getting bad. He began chronicling all his bad fortune, writing that he had suffered, quote, 100 calamities. But as soon as he lost the blanket, his bad luck seemed to stop. He ended up digging further into the history of the blanket and discovered it had been woven by a Navajo woman named Mariana, who had made it for a stranger who rode into town that she had fallen in love with. Only her daughter had also fallen in love with the man. The stranger didn't return either of their feelings though, and the daughter ended up dying, according to the tale, of a broken heart. In a form of revenge, Mariana ended up cursing the blanket, and 3 months later, the stranger's horse was found with an empty saddle, and the blanket was found hanging on a tree branch, stained red.
Next up, we have the fact that the bottom layer of the Grand Canyon, located just below the Proterozoic layer, is made up entirely of metamorphic basement rocks, which are rocks found in the common household basement. Just kidding. They are rocks classified by their igneous intrusions, which means that either magma or lava has either entered and cooled or cooled on top of previously formed rock. This layer of the canyon is referred to as Zoroaster granite. The reason for the existence of the metamorphic rock is the Unicaret volcanic field, which was the source of at least 150 lava flows that poured into the Grand Canyon. Pretty hot stuff.
The story of Robert Spangler is absolutely wild. How this guy got away with everything he did is pretty astonishing. Every woman who ended up marrying this guy mysteriously died. Mysteriously. One of which at the Grand Canyon. So on April 11th, 1993, Robert Spangler walked into a ranger station at the Grand Canyon to report that his wife, Donna Sundling, had fallen to her death. He said that they had paused to take a picture on the trail, and when he turned back, she was gone. Rangers found Sundling's body about 160 feet below the trail. Her death was ruled an accident. Spangler was never formally accused of causing it, well, at least not for a while. But even though there was no way to definitively prove that Spangler was responsible for his wife's death, it was highly suspicious because 15 years prior to this, Spangler had another wife and a family, all of whom were found dead in their suburban Denver home in 1978. Spangler had managed to make it look like his wife had killed their two youngsters before taking her own life. So after his third wife had accidentally fallen to her death, Spangler started contacting his second wife again, Sharon. She ended up moving back into his home in Colorado, and on October 2nd, 1994, Spangler claimed that he'd found Sharon unresponsive in their house next to a bottle of Tylenol. She died later that day, and Spangler just happened to receive a $20,000 payout from Sharon's life insurance policy after her death. In 2000, Spangler was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he ended up confessing to all his crimes, all except for Sharon. He admitted to killing his first family because he wanted a new life, and he pushed his third wife off a cliff because he was unhappy in his marriage, because apparently divorce doesn't exist. Anyway, in March of 2001, Robert Spangler was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes, but his cancer took him out 5 months later.
Next on our list today, we have the Hydes, or more accurately, the disappearance of Glenn and Bessie Hyde, who went missing in the fall of 1928. The pair were newlyweds, hoping to run the rapids of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon in Arizona, making Bessie Hyde the first woman to accomplish the feat. Unfortunately, that never happened, because on December 19th of 1928, the couple's boat was found abandoned, floating upright and fully stocked in the river. The pair had been seen and photographed just a month prior to their boat turning up unmanned in the cold water of the canyon. They had been restocking on goods and supplies when Bessie was overheard wondering aloud if she would ever wear pretty shoes again. Well, there is no way of knowing if she ever did, because as far as conclusive evidence goes, the pair was never found. Although many years later, in 1971, a woman claiming to be Bessie Hyde stated that she had killed her husband Glenn in order to escape his tormenting behaviors. While there was some evidence to back up her claim, documents of Glenn's early life, which would have been pretty easily obtainable, and a weapon, the woman's story is widely deemed as just that, a story. The investigation of the Hyde's death led to the discovery of many bodies found within the Grand Canyon, but none of them actually belonged to the Hydes themselves. Theories about the Hyde's disappearance range from people believing them to have drowned in the river to believing that they were chopped apart by tribes living in the canyon. At this point, it's looking like we'll never really know.
Well, how could I not involve a big hairy ape monster on a list of scary discoveries? Yes, even the Grand Canyon is known for a mysterious creature. Arizona has its own version of Bigfoot, known as the Mogollon Monster or simply the Arizona Bigfoot. Sightings have been reported all throughout the state, but the oldest report dates back to 1903 in the Grand Canyon. The Arizona Republican newspaper came out with a story about a man named I.W. Stevens, who'd had a horrifying encounter with a big, hairy creature near the canyon. He described it as having, quote, long white hair and a matted beard that reached to his knees. It wore no clothing, and upon his talon-like fingers were claws at least 2 inches long. So he'd come across this bizarre creature drinking the BLOOD of 2 cougars, and when the creature spotted him, it threatened him with a club and, quote, screamed the wildest, most unearthly screech.
Next up, we have one of the deadliest airline disasters in American history, which somehow occurred directly over the Grand Canyon and cost the lives of 128 passengers. The freak accident occurred on the morning of June 30th in 1956. Just 1 hour after departing from the Los Angeles International Airport, United Airlines Flight 718 and Trans World Airlines Flight 2 collided in midair above the Grand Canyon. Both pilots had somehow veered off of their designated routes and ended up flying at the exact same altitude in the exact same space at the exact same time. The reasons behind the crash were listed as lack of communication, turbulent weather, and flight rules. However, given the large number of coincidences that led to the accident, the crash of Flight 718 and Flight 2 out of LA holds an air of undeniable mystery.
Finally, we have the Thunderbird, a creature from Native American folklore. Giant birds with 20-foot wingspans, creating lightning storms as they flap their powerful wings. There have been reports of massive-sized birds flying over Arizona, though, especially around the Grand Canyon, some in quite recent years. One of the most famous stories, though, dates back to the late 1800s, when 2 cowboys in Tombstone claimed to have shot down one of these massive birds. The story goes that the cowboys were riding through the desert when they spotted this enormous bird perched on a rocky outcrop. They fired at it, as cowboys do, and eventually they brought the bird down. They managed to transport it back to Tombstone, where it was then displayed in a local shop for everyone to gawk at for a while. Again, that's not the only story. Over the years, many people have reported seeing giant birds in the skies over Arizona. Some describe them as having feathers and resembling oversized condors, while other people have said they've seen what looks more like some sort of prehistoric creature, like a pterodactyl.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have fossil tracks. In 2016, a Norwegian geology professor named Alan Krill was hiking with his students in the Grand Canyon National Park when he noticed something laying next to the trail that really stuck out to him. It appeared to be some strange fossil footprints, which he took a photo of and sent to his friend, who was a paleontologist. Well, turns out this find that Alan just happened to stumble upon is actually incredible. The tracks turned out to be the oldest vertebrate tracks found in the Grand Canyon, and that place is teeming with fossil tracks, so that's super impressive. These tracks are actually 313 million years old and among the oldest on Earth of shelled egg-laying animals like reptiles. This discovery was not only super cool but super important because every little thing can give us insight into the ancient history of Earth and the species who used to walk here. In our number 9 spot today, we have Scott. Earlier this year in the summer, crews were sadly having to search the Grand Canyon area in the hopes of finding a man who was missing, but this sad search took a sinister turn that no one was expecting. Instead of finding the man they were looking for, they found the remains of another person. This person is believed to be Scott Walsh, who had been last seen stepping off of a shuttle bus near the south of the park all the way back in 2015. This is something that doesn't happen a lot considering how expansive the national park is, but this coincidence, although gruesome and terrible, was a great one so that Scott could be found and finally laid to rest. In our number 8 spot today, we have Gabor. So, remember that guy we just talked about? Like they were searching for one but found another? Well, they also found the one that they were initially searching for as well. This man was named Gabor and he was a Hungarian national and he was 45 years old. He was believed to be traveling to the South Rim somewhere around July 19th, but when he wasn't heard from, he was reported missing. He was actually reported missing to the Las Vegas police, who then reported it to the Grand Canyon Rangers because of these travel plans that they had known about, and this is when the people at the park were able to locate his car at the Grand Canyon Visitor Center. Gabor's body was found 430 feet below the rim and he was transferred to the medical examiner for further investigation into what could have happened. In our number 7 spot today we have Emily and Aaron. Emily and Aaron Coford are a mom and daughter duo who have been to the Grand Canyon a few times together, but one time someone caught a video of a super scary moment that they had. The two were visiting the canyon to watch the sunset and decided to venture out onto a rock near the edge of the rim off the trail. Emily grabbed her mom's phone to snap a pic and began taking a few steps back, and that's when someone caught this video. Yep, Emily quite literally almost slipped off the edge of the rock. That would have been absolutely terrible. This video is a reminder to us all to be careful and safe, especially when you're at the Grand Canyon. There are quite a few accidental deaths that happen there every year, and they definitely can be preventable. In our number 6 spot today we have this accident. Eagle Point and the Grand Canyon Skywalk are a popular tourist destination point that sit on the western end of the Grand Canyon. In 2019, this is where a man, whose name has not been released, who was traveling with a group from Hong Kong, went to take a selfie photo of himself. Unfortunately, the 50-year-old, while taking photos, ended up slipping and falling. There has never been any indication that this terrible incident was anything more than a horrible accident. His body ended up being recovered from 1,000 feet below the rim. The area was of course closed for the day while investigations were taking place. In our number 5 spot today we have relief. This one is not exactly terrifying and more relieving, to be perfectly honest. Just a few months ago, in August of this year, an Arizona man was reported missing while he had been on a hike in the Grand Canyon National Park. The call came in after 2 hikers were overdue for the return home, and then when one of them showed up but not the other, alarm bells quickly rang. The initial aerial search by the park rangers failed to show any signs of the missing hiker, but then the next day 6 ground search teams went out to look, as well as a helicopter. Ready for the relieving part? They found him and he was totally okay. I mean, probably a little sunburnt, maybe a little thirsty, and probably absolutely terrified, but he was alive and waiting to be evacuated by helicopter. It's so nice when these things have a happy ending. I just wish it was all like this. In our number 4 spot today we have Steven. Okay, so this one wasn't actually found in the Grand Canyon, but it went missing in the Grand Canyon, and I honestly was just so shocked by this story, I wanted to tell you guys about it, so I had to include it. So a man named Stephen Coleman, who is 60 years old and is from Portland, was last seen on December 20th of last year in 2020. He was on the south rim of the canyon, and it was believed that he was traveling alone and going hiking. He left his belongings with a friend before he headed down into the canyon, but when he never came to retrieve them, the friend of course got worried. Quickly a search was initiated, but nothing was turning up. The search lasted for 7 weeks. But guess what? They found him, and he was alive. On February 7th of this year, Stephen was found outside of the Grand Canyon National Park around noon. They did not release any details about his disappearance, but they did let everyone know that he is in good health. Honestly, 2 refreshing ones back to back. What a nice breather. In our number 3 spot today we have John. On or around February 23rd of this year, it is believed that John Pennington, who is from Walton, Kentucky, entered the Grand Canyon National Park after he left his vehicle near Yaqui Point in Arizona. It is believed that he was alone at the time and possibly traveling on a yellow motorcycle. A few weeks later, sadly, park officials were doing a multi-day search and rescue mission when they found human remains and a motorcycle, both belonging to John. He was found 465 feet below the canyon's rim and was recovered by helicopter. Earlier in the day before John had gone missing, he posted a video of himself on social media which showed his first skydiving experience. In the video, John speaks the now haunting words, "Thankful and grateful for life and another day." While discoveries like this are always terrible, it is most definitely a great thing that these bodies are found so that they can be brought back to their loved ones. In our number 2 spot today we have Lillian. In February of this year, 31-year-old Lillian Main from Woodside, California was reported missing by a family member. From here the search began and her car was quickly found on the south rim of the canyon, but Lillian still wasn't located. Search and rescue crews were sent out to look for her, and while the initial search didn't turn up anything, the next search the following day did, but sadly they were not the results we were hoping for. The recovery team had located her body about 300 feet below the rim. Both the National Park Service and the medical examiner began their own investigations, but not much other information was provided. In our number 1 spot today we have Rebecca. I wouldn't have known this if it wasn't for this video, but apparently flash floods are quite common in the desert southwest. It is said that this is because of the arid, sparsely vegetated environments that exist in this region that aren't really able to absorb the rainfall. And then in the Grand Canyon, the rain runoff runs quite quickly through the narrow canyons and steep terrain found here. It's like even small storms can turn into a bigger problem in just a matter of minutes. disappearance. Unfortunately, earlier this year, that is exactly what happened. During this event, National Park Rangers received a report of 2 missing people and multiple injured people. They dispatched 2 paramedics to head there and assess the patients and give treatments, but because of the storm, overnight search and rescue options were extremely limited. The paramedics went and treated those who were injured, but the missing people weren't found until the next day. Around 11 a.m. there was a tip called in about the 2 missing people. One of the individuals was uninjured, but sadly the other one had passed away. This woman was 29-year-old Rebecca Copeland of Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm not exactly sure what happened to Rebecca in the end, but it was being investigated by a
Coming in at number 10 is Yosemite National Park. With more than 750 miles of trail, Yosemite National Park is a vast unspoiled wilderness, making it a hiker's dream. But if someone disappears, sending a search team is a nightmare. Now at the moment there are 13 people still missing there, the disappearances ranging from 1972 to 2021. Now one disappearance is the case of Michael Fiercy. He was an outdoorsman, so why did he get lost and never be found? We don't know. In 2005 he decided to hike solo through Yosemite National Park. He had once cracked an ankle at Yellowstone, having to crawl all the way out of the wilderness, so when the outdoorsman failed to return from his adventure after his permit expired and his family expected him home, they feared the worst. Now the search for Fiercy was so massive that the United States Marines were involved. They found one thing belonged to him, his backpack. Now it contained his map, water, and camera. Now his friends and family were even more concerned at this point because they believed that Fiercy would never willingly leave his bag at any time during a hike. Now unfortunately, in the 16 years that have passed, not another trace of Fiercy has been found. With someone so experienced, I find this disappearance to be suspicious. Number 9. Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Dennis Martin was on a camping trip at Great Smoky Mountains National Park with his family in the summer of 1969. Dennis and his brothers had planned a prank. They were going to hide separately in the bush and jump out on different sides of the campsite to scare their fathers. They did the prank, but they realized that Dennis was missing. Family, park rangers, and other hikers spread out to search for Dennis almost immediately, but he was nowhere to be found. That evening there was heavy rainfall, which is bad news when you're trying to track someone. The search for Dennis became the largest in National Park Service history. Dennis seemed to have disappeared completely, leaving no trace at all. Now people's disappearances at national parks have prompted people to question how a map of missing persons in the US lines up with America's largest cave systems. Are these people disappearing and being taken to these caves by cave people, animals, or some sort of creature? And are the caves portals to parallel universes? Who knows? Number 8. San Bernardino National Forest. David Gonzalez went camping with his family in San Bernardino National Forest. At one point he asked his mother if he could go get some cookies from the family car, but 40 minutes passed and his mother realized that David never returned and the cookies he wanted to grab were still inside the car. Now he was never found alive again. His death is viewed as one of the strange disappearances in national parks. A week after missing, his badly decomposed body was found only a mile away from where he went missing. Now this area was already combed days prior, so this means that he must have been dropped there by someone or something. An autopsy revealed no trauma and no overt injury. He was just dead without any reason or clue as to why. Now this is already baffling, but what makes the case of David so strange is not his disappearance alone, it's the way the local authorities and investigators seem to handle the case. The officials claim that David was dragged off by a mountain lion, despite no injuries that would suggest that be his fate. Nobody nearby heard David scream either. Now David's parents had gone on record to say that they don't believe David got dragged off by a cougar. They believe that he was kidnapped and that he still may be alive somewhere and that the body wasn't his. Now is this sounding exactly like Stranger Things to anyone else? Maybe he got sucked into the Upside Down with Will and is fighting against a Demogorgon. Number 7. Grand Canyon National Park. At least 56 people have been reported missing from Grand Canyon National Park since the beginning of 2018, and at least 6 people have been found dead. Now this is despite the park not only being smaller, but seeing millions fewer visitors than many of the other 424 national park sites. While the park is beautiful, a New York Post investigation recently found it is also the deadliest national park in the country, with the most number of missing persons in the nation. On June 2nd, 2015, Morgan Heimer was working for Tour West, a commercial rafting company, and he was a guide for an 8-day rafting trip along the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. While standing near a cliff, Morgan spoke with the lead rafting guide and mentioned something about taking some time off that afternoon. The lead guide was pulled away by a client during this conversation and walked away from the cliff to speak with them. When the guide looked back to the direction that Morgan was standing, he was gone. Now the guide just assumed that Morgan had taken a break and would be back, but Morgan was never seen again. During the afternoon and into the evening, Morgan never showed up for the group's activities. A member of the group then reported Morgan missing that same day. Park rangers and search and rescue teams thoroughly searched the river and surrounding areas. The search lasted for 6 days before it was assumed that Morgan must have drowned. Now his body has never turned up, and there was no trace that he was still alive after June 2nd, 2015. Number 6. Chiricahua National Monument. On January 13th, 1980, Ranger Paul Fugate disappeared from what should have been a routine hike in Arizona's Chiricahua National Monument. Paul, who was last seen heading out to do a trail trek around 2 p.m., told a coworker that they could start closing duties without him if he wasn't back by 4:30 p.m. He was then seen starting down the trailhead, and that was the last any person spoke to him or saw him. His girlfriend alerted authorities, who undertook a search for him. They first assumed that he had been a victim of an accident and was injured or stranded in the backcountry. However, as the investigation continued and no traces were found, suspicions began to arise. No trace of Paul has ever been found since that day in 1980. Now, to make things even more difficult, Chiricahua has 17 square miles of canyons, treacherous terrain, and wildlands. Now, the search and rescue teams found absolutely nothing related to the park ranger. Number 5. Nahanni National Park Reserve. Now, this is a strange case. Over the decades, many unfortunate travelers and explorers have gone missing, or they turned up dead and beheaded in the Nahanni Valley. Now, the number of decapitated bodies found within the Nahanni Valley have earned it the nickname Valley of Headless Men. In 1917, Martin Jorgensen's body was discovered decapitated next to the remains of his cabin as it was burned to the ground. It is suspected that he struck gold in the vicinity as he wrote of it back home before ending up beheaded. Then in 1931, another body was found. This time it was that of Phil Powers. His charred remains were discovered in ashes of what were his cabin. The RCMP were quick to attribute his death to a faulty stovepipe, but their explanation was repeatedly debunked by various sources. Now, many others simply disappeared without a trace in the remote wilderness of the valley. In 1928, one prospector named Angus Hall ventured ahead of his party and was never seen again. Another pair of prospectors, Joe Mulholland and Bill Ipper, disappeared in 1936. Now, for many years they were searched for but were never found. The only thing discovered was their cabin, burnt down to the ground. Why are so many people going missing in this specific area, and why are their cabins being burnt down? Number 4. Mount Charleston in Humboldt-Toyabee National Forest. Larry Jeffrey disappeared near the peak of a 12,000-foot Mount Charleston in Humboldt-Toyabee National Forest. Now, the search began immediately after the boy wandered away from his brothers, and within days the National Guard and a team of bloodhounds had joined the search. In a TV interview, David Paulies told reporter George Knapp that there were no predators afoot that day, and since the area they were in was pretty secluded, it's easy to rule out abduction by car. This boy just walked into oblivion, David said. Now, when Jeffrey disappeared, he was wearing light clothing, and authorities were doubtful that he could survive the cold temperatures at night. Now, searchers found and lost the trail a few times, and they discovered evidence that the boy had been eating insects and forged berries along the way. Overall, 1,000 people searched for 16 days but never found him. It appears that he just went poof, maybe into an alternate dimension. Perhaps. Number 3. Ozark National Park. In the 1940s, a girl named Catherine Van Alst went missing while camping at Ozark National Park with her family. She was barefoot and wearing only her swimsuit when she disappeared. Now, searches were conducted high and low for the missing girl, but it wasn't until 6 days later that she was found. Now, the catch: she was still barefoot, still in her swimsuit, and totally unharmed. She was alive. Now, she'd also traveled over 30 miles and climbed 600 feet without getting a scratch on her. her. She wasn't even scared. Now, no one, including her, has ever been able to explain it. Could she have gotten trapped in a portal and somehow made her way back to our world? That could be one explanation for sure. Number 2, Santa Fe National Forest. Santa Fe National Forest in New Mexico has bizarre wooden structures all throughout the forest. Now, no one knows who made them or why. The structures range in size but have all been constructed out of fallen trees and limbs, with some reaching over 20 feet tall and dozens of feet in diameter. They don't seem to have a pattern as to their locations, they simply just appear. Now, they do have a few things in common though. They resemble teepees, though no one can actually live inside them, and the Forest Service has no idea who is building them or why, but their response so far has been to dismantle any that are found. The destruction of these mystery structures is to eliminate the forest fire threat that they create. The Santa Fe National Park Service has issued a press release asking for any information about the mystery structures, and according to the release, these structures are prohibited under federal law and violators could face a fine up to $5,000 and possible imprisonment for 6 months. Now, does this have to do with cults? Can these structures transport you to another dimension? I guess we'll have to see. And coming in at number 1 is Green Mountain National Forest. The Vermont State Police exists because of Paula Jean Weldon. Now, Paula Weldon was a student at Vermont's Bennington College and was familiar with the Green Mountain National Forest to the east of her college town. Now, according to Bennington Banner, Paula set off for the trail on December 1st, 1946, telling her roommate, "I'm off for a long walk," and she was wearing relatively light clothing. Now, she apparently hitchhiked to the trail with local Louis Knapp, who gave a ride to a young woman matching her description. He dropped her off near the trail, and the last known person to see her was a washman named Ernie Whiteman, who warned her about going into the cold landscape. Once it became clear that Paula had gone into the forest but hadn't left, a search was organized, but it was to no avail. Now, Paula was actually one of 6 people who were reported missing near Bennington from 1945 to 1950. Now, their still unsolved disappearances helped to earn the nickname of Bennington Triangle for the area. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 parallel universe portals hidden inside national parks. Now, do you think there's something more sinister in national parks? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I'm your host, Emily, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
It's about the darkest secrets in the ocean that you never knew about. Click the video now to find out more and prepare to have your mind blown. See you guys in the next one.